I remember the day like it was yesterday. I was 5, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, playing with my dolls. The sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow across the room. My mother, Marjorie, was in the kitchen, her voice carrying through the house as she chatted animatedly on the phone. At first, I wasn't paying much attention, but then a few words caught my ear. "Oh yes, we're finally having a boy," she exclaimed, her voice laced with excitement. "Clark and I couldn't be happier. A son is just what we need. A son." Her words echoed in my mind, each syllable a tiny prick against my heart. My name is Hazel, and at that moment, I realized something that would shadow my childhood. I wasn't enough. I sat there, my dolls forgotten, a knot forming in my stomach. I didn't fully understand it then, but I felt the shift, the anticipation of something big, something that didn't include me. Marjorie's voice continued, "It's a relief, really. I mean, we love Hazel, of course, but a boy, well, you know how it is." I didn't know how it was, but I knew how it felt. Like being an afterthought. I got up quietly and wandered into the kitchen, hoping to be noticed, to be pulled into the circle of her joy. She glanced at me, her smile faltering for a split second before she turned her back, engrossed in her conversation again. "Mom." I ventured, my voice small. "Not now, Hazel. Go play," she said, waving me off without a second glance. I turned away, the sting of her dismissal settling in my chest. I went to my room, climbed onto my bed, and stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. It was then that I decided to stop waiting for her approval. I had Edith, my grandmother, who always made me feel like the center of her universe. Later that evening, Edith came over, her presence a balm to my wounded heart. She had a way of making everything feel okay, her eyes warm and understanding. I sat next to her on the couch, leaning into her comforting embrace. "Something on your mind, Hazel?" she asked gently, her fingers brushing through my hair. I hesitated, unsure of how to voice the heaviness in my heart. "Mom's excited about the baby," I said finally, trying to keep my voice steady. Edith sighed softly, pulling me closer. "Babies have a way of making people excited," she said, her tone careful. "But you, my dear, are special just as you are." Her words wrapped around me like a protective shield, and I clung to them, even as I felt the weight of my parents' expectations pressing down on me. I didn't know it then, but that moment marked the beginning of a journey, a quest for approval I would never truly receive. The realization that my place in the family was conditional set me on a path I couldn't yet comprehend. As I lay in bed that night, staring into the darkness, I promised myself I would find a way to matter. Little did I know, this was just the start of a story that would unfold in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Returning home after a few months with Edith was like stepping into a different world. The house felt smaller, the air thick with newness. A brother, Oliver, had arrived. Marjorie and Clark were all smiles, their attention riveted on the tiny bundle in the crib. I stood at the doorway, feeling like an outsider in my own family. "Hazel, come meet your brother," Marjorie called, her voice bright with an excitement I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. I approached cautiously, peering into the crib at Oliver's scrunched-up face. He was just a baby, innocent in all this, yet the center of a universe I was no longer part of. Marjorie was watching me, her eyes expectant, waiting for some sign of sisterly affection. "He's cute," I managed, unsure of what else to say. My words felt hollow, even to me. Marjorie nodded, satisfied. "You'll be a great help with him, I'm sure," she said, already turning her attention back to Oliver. And just like that, I was drafted into the role of caretaker. Days blurred into one another as I found myself fetching diapers, warming bottles, and rocking Oliver to sleep. I was expected to love him, and I did in my own way. But resentment simmered beneath the surface, a quiet rebellion against the unfairness of it all. One afternoon, we went to the park, a rare family outing. Clark was there, but his eyes were glued to his phone, fingers tapping away at emails, even on a weekend. I was pushing Oliver on the swings, the sun warm on my back, when he let out a gleeful shriek. I smiled, his happiness infectious. For a moment, I forgot everything else. Then it happened. Oliver, in his excitement, tried to leap off the swing. I reached for him, but he tumbled to the ground, a wail piercing the air. I scooped him up, my heart pounding with fear and guilt. Blood trickled from a scrape on his knee. Marjorie rushed over, her eyes wide with panic. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice sharp. I was right here," I stammered, holding Oliver close. "He just slipped." Clark finally looked up from his phone, his brows furrowed. "You should have been watching him more carefully, Hazel." The accusation stung more than I expected. I opened my mouth to protest, but Marjorie's glare silenced me. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, my apology unspoken. As we drove home, Oliver's cries subsided, but the tension in the car was palpable. I stared out the window, blinking back tears of frustration. It was as if no matter what I did, I was destined to fail in their eyes. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about Edith, about how she would have understood. I missed her fiercely. But more than that, I missed the feeling of being enough, of not having to prove my worth at every turn. The next morning, I overheard Marjorie on the phone again, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Yes, Hazel's back now. It's good to have an extra pair of hands," she said, laughter in her voice. "She's quite the little helper." Helper. The word grated against my skin, a reminder of my place in this family. As I stood there listening, I realized something. I wasn't just a helper. I was the one holding everything together, even if they couldn't see it. A resolve settled within me. I would find my own way to shine, to be seen for who I truly was. And if that meant stepping out of the shadows they'd cast, so be it. Life at home had become a delicate balancing act, each day teetering on the edge of tension. Marjorie and Clark were wrapped up in Oliver's world, their lives orbiting around his every need and whim. I was the constant in the background, the one who kept things running smoothly, even if no one seemed to notice. One evening, I overheard a conversation that would change everything. I was passing by the living room when I heard Edith's voice, unusually sharp and firm. "Marjorie, you've got to stop treating Hazel like she's invisible," Edith said, her words slicing through the air with a precision that left no room for misunderstanding. I paused, my heart pounding. Edith was standing up for me, confronting Marjorie in a way I'd never dared to. Marjorie sighed, a sound of exasperation. "Mother, you know we love Hazel. It's just that Oliver needs more attention right now." "Does he?" Edith countered, her voice steady. "Or is it that you've chosen to give him more attention because it suits your idea of a perfect family?" There was a pause, a silence heavy with unspoken truths. I leaned against the wall, my hands trembling slightly. It was a relief to hear someone voice what I'd felt for so long, yet it was terrifying to think of the fallout. Marjorie's voice softened, almost pleading. "It's not like that. Hazel's strong, independent. She doesn't need us the way Oliver does." I clenched my fists, anger flaring in my chest. Independence wasn't a choice. It was a necessity forced upon me by their neglect. Edith didn't back down. "That's because you've never given her the chance to need you. You've pushed her away, and one day, you might find that she's gone for good." The conversation ended abruptly, and I slipped away before they could see me. My heart was a storm of emotions. Gratitude for Edith's support, anger at Marjorie's dismissiveness, and a deep, aching sadness for what could never be. The next day, I threw myself into my schoolwork with renewed determination. If they wouldn't see me, I'd make sure the world did. My grades soared, each a silent rebellion, a testament to my worth beyond their narrow view. But life had a way of throwing curveballs. One afternoon, while I was studying at the library, Edith called, her voice urgent. "Hazel, you need to come home. There's been an accident." I rushed back, dread pooling in my stomach. Oliver had fallen from a tree in the backyard, his arm twisted at an odd angle. Marjorie was frantic, Clark pacing like a caged animal. As we sat in the hospital waiting room, the air thick with tension, Marjorie turned to me, her eyes red and accusing. "Where were you, Hazel? You should have been watching him." The words were like a slap, the blame settling on my shoulders like a familiar weight. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. Edith, sitting beside me, took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "It's not Hazel's fault," she said, her voice a beacon of strength. Marjorie looked away, her silence more telling than any words. In that moment, I realized that their expectations would always be unrealistic, their love conditional. I left the hospital that night, a resolve hardening in my heart. I would carve out my own path, one that didn't rely on their approval. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to show them what they'd lost. The college acceptance letter arrived on a crisp autumn morning, a beacon of hope in an otherwise gray world. I held it in my hands, the paper smooth and promising, a testament to my hard work and determination. It was a full scholarship, my ticket out, my chance to finally step into a life of my own making. I showed it to Edith first, her eyes lighting up with pride. "I knew you could do it, Hazel," she said, pulling me into a hug. Her belief in me was unwavering, a constant source of strength. But when I shared the news with Marjorie and Clark, their reaction was less enthusiastic. Marjorie glanced at the letter, then at me, her smile tight. "That's wonderful, Hazel. But have you thought about how you'll manage everything? College is expensive, and we're focusing on Oliver's future right now." I felt the familiar sting of disappointment, the joy of my achievement overshadowed by their priorities. "I have a scholarship," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It covers most of the costs." Clark nodded, distractedly. "That's good, Hazel. Just make sure you keep your grades up. We can't afford any slip-ups." Their words hung in the air, a reminder of the conditional nature of their support. I nodded, swallowing my frustration. This was my moment, and I wouldn't let their indifference ruin it. As I prepared to leave for college, Edith surprised me with a gift, a small, delicate necklace with a pendant shaped like a key. "For your new beginnings," she said, fastening it around my neck. "You hold the key to your own future, Hazel." I hugged her tightly, grateful for her unwavering love. Her words stayed with me as I stepped onto campus, a reminder that I was forging my own path. College was a whirlwind of new experiences and challenges. I juggled classes and a part-time job, determined to succeed on my own terms. But the weight of my parents' neglect lingered, a shadow I couldn't quite shake. One evening, during a rare phone call with Marjorie, she dropped a bombshell. "We've decided to invest in Oliver's education fund," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "So we won't be able to help you financially anymore." I gripped the phone tighter, my heart sinking. "I never asked for your help," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Good," she said, a hint of relief in her voice. "I knew you'd understand." The call ended, leaving me alone with my thoughts. It was a turning point, a moment of clarity. I realized that I couldn't keep chasing their approval, couldn't let their choices dictate my worth. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt a shift within me. I didn't need their support to succeed. I had my own strength, my own determination, and I had Edith, who believed in me without condition. The next day, I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined to prove to myself that I could do it. I worked harder, stayed up later, and pushed through the exhaustion. And slowly, I began to see the truth. I didn't need their validation. I was building a life of my own, one that didn't rely on their approval or support. I was carving out my own path, and for the first time, I felt truly free. Graduation day should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I stood there in my cap and gown, surrounded by cheering classmates and proud families. The air buzzed with excitement, but a part of me felt hollow. Edith was there, beaming with pride, her presence a comforting balm. But the absence of Marjorie and Clark was a glaring reminder of the chasm between us. After the ceremony, Edith hugged me tightly. "You've done it, Hazel." "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, clinging to her warmth. Later, as we walked to the car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Marjorie. "Congratulations. Sorry we couldn't make it. Busy weekend. Love, Mom." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as tears threatened to spill. Busy weekend. That was all they had to say. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my resolve hardening. Back home, I found a letter waiting for me. It was from the dental school I had applied to, the next step in my journey. I tore it open, my heart pounding. I had been accepted. Another victory, another step toward independence. I shared the news with Edith, her joy infectious. But as the days passed, the weight of my parents' indifference settled heavily on my shoulders. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how much I achieved, it would never be enough for them. As I prepared to move for dental school, I received an unexpected call from Oliver. "Hey, Hazel," he said, his voice casual. "I heard you graduated." "Congrats." "Thanks, Oliver," I replied, surprised by his call. "Listen, I know things have been tense between us," he continued. "But I wanted to say I'm proud of you. You've always been the smart one." His words were unexpected, a glimmer of hope in our strained relationship. "Thanks, Oliver." "That means a lot," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Yeah, well, don't get too used to it," he joked, but there was sincerity beneath his teasing. As I hung up, I felt a shift within me. Maybe things could change. Maybe there was a chance for something better. But life had other plans. A week later, I received a frantic call from Marjorie. "Hazel, we need your help," she said, her voice laced with desperation. "Your father's business is in trouble, and we're in a financial bind." I listened, my heart sinking. They needed me now, after all this time. I was torn between the desire to help and the need to protect my hard-earned independence. "Let me think about it," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. As I hung up, I knew I was at a crossroads. Helping them could mean sacrificing my own dreams, but turning away felt like abandoning the hope of finally earning their approval. That night, I lay awake, Edith's words echoing in my mind. "You hold the key to your own future." I realized that I had to choose my own path, one that didn't rely on their validation. The next morning, I called Marjorie. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you financially," I said, my voice firm. "I need to focus on my future." There was silence on the other end, a heavy pause that spoke volumes. "I understand," Marjorie said finally, her voice tinged with resignation. As I hung up, I felt a sense of liberation. I had chosen myself, my dreams, and my future. It was a step toward the life I wanted, one where I was enough, just as I was. Life in dental school was demanding, but it was a challenge I embraced. I was carving out a future on my own terms, fueled by the knowledge that I was finally in control. Yet, beneath the surface, the wounds from my family's neglect still festered, a constant reminder of the love and validation I craved but never received. One evening, as I sat in the library buried under textbooks, my phone buzzed. It was Oliver. His voice was strained, a far cry from his usual carefree tone. "Hazel, I need your help," he said, urgency in his words. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart sinking. "It's Mom and Dad," he continued, his voice cracking. "They're losing the house. Dad's business took a hit, and they're drowning in debt." The news hit me like a punch to the gut. Despite everything, they were still my family. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice steady, though my mind was racing. "They need money, Hazel. You're doing well, right? Maybe you could help them out." I hesitated, the weight of my own struggles pressing down on me. I had just started to find my footing, and now this. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. As I hung up, I felt the familiar tug of responsibility, the old wounds reopening. I wanted to help, but I knew the cost. Helping them might mean sacrificing my own future, my independence. In the days that followed, I wrestled with my decision. Edith's words echoed in my mind, a reminder of the strength she saw in me. But the guilt gnawed at me, a relentless pressure that threatened to unravel everything I'd worked for. One evening, as I sat with Jonah, my husband, I finally broke. "I don't know what to do," I confessed, tears spilling over. "They need me, but I can't keep putting my life on hold for them." Jonah wrapped his arms around me, his presence grounding. "Hazel, you've done everything you can. You deserve to live your life, to chase your dreams. You're not responsible for their choices." His words were a balm, but the guilt lingered. I knew he was right, but the thought of turning my back on them felt impossible. Then, a week later, the final blow came. I received a call from Marjorie, her voice cold and distant. "We've decided to sell the house," she said, the words clipped. "We thought you should know." I listened in silence, the reality of their situation sinking in. I had hoped that by helping them, I might finally earn their approval, their love. But now, it was clear that nothing I did would ever be enough. As I hung up, I felt a sense of finality, a door closing on a chapter of my life. I had reached my lowest point, the realization that I couldn't save them, that I couldn't fix what was broken. But in that darkness, a new resolve began to form. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape my future. I would build a life where I was enough, where I didn't need their validation to feel whole. And so, with a heavy heart, I turned my focus back to my studies, determined to rise from the ashes of my family's expectations. It was time to forge my own path, one that was truly mine. The family dinner was supposed to be a simple affair, a chance to reconnect after months of silence. Jonah and I arrived with Leo, who was buzzing with excitement to see his grandparents. I was less enthusiastic, the weight of past grievances hanging over me like a storm cloud. As we settled around the table, the atmosphere was tense, each of us navigating the unspoken history that lay between us. Marjorie and Clark sat across from me, their smiles strained. Oliver was there too, his usual charm subdued. The conversation started innocuously enough, small talk about work and school. But beneath the surface, I could feel the tension simmering, waiting to boil over. It was Leo, in his innocent curiosity, who unwittingly lit the fuse. He was playing with Marjorie's phone, giggling at the pictures when he suddenly exclaimed, "Mommy, why does it say cash cow next to your name?" The room went silent, the words hanging in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. My heart stopped, shock and betrayal crashing over me in waves. I looked at Marjorie, her face pale, eyes wide with panic. "Leo, give me that," Marjorie said, her voice sharp as she snatched the phone from his hands. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Is that what you think of me?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "A cash cow?" Marjorie opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Clark shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "I've done everything I could to help this family," I continued, my voice rising. "And this is how you see me? Just a source of money." Oliver looked between us, his expression conflicted. "Hazel, I'm sure it's not." "Not what, Oliver?" I interrupted, my eyes flashing. "Not what it looks like. Because it seems pretty clear to me." Marjorie finally found her voice, her tone defensive. "It was a joke, Hazel. You know how things are. We didn't mean it like that." "A joke?" I repeated, incredulous. "This isn't funny. It's humiliating." The room was tense, the air thick with unspoken truths. I could feel Jonah's steady presence beside me, his hand resting reassuringly on my back. I took a deep breath, the anger giving way to a cold, hard resolve. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady. "I've spent my whole life trying to earn your approval, and I'm done. I won't be your cash cow anymore." Marjorie's eyes filled with tears, her composure cracking. "Hazel, please." "No," I said firmly. "I love you, but I can't keep sacrificing my happiness for your expectations." With that, I turned and walked away, Jonah and Leo following close behind. My heart was heavy, but for the first time, I felt free. I had faced my greatest challenge, stood up for myself, and chosen my own path. As we drove home, Jonah reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. I nodded, a small smile playing on my lips. I had confronted the core themes of my life, revenge, justice, and self-worth, and emerged stronger for it. The resolution wasn't what I had imagined, but it was mine, and that was enough. Life had settled into a new rhythm after the dinner confrontation. I focused on my work, my family, and the future I was building with Jonah and Leo. Edith was my constant support, her wisdom and love a guiding light through the turbulence. One afternoon, I sat on the porch watching Leo play in the yard, his laughter echoing through the air like a song of freedom. Edith sat beside me, knitting quietly, her presence a comforting anchor. As I watched Leo, a sense of peace washed over me. I had spent so much of my life chasing approval, but now I realized I had everything I needed right here. My family, my career, my independence. These were the things that defined me, not the expectations of others. The mail arrived, and among the usual bills and flyers was a letter from Marjorie. I hesitated, the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my chest, but curiosity won out, and I opened it. The letter was simple, heartfelt. Marjorie expressed regret for the past, acknowledging the pain her actions had caused. She spoke of the pride she felt in my accomplishments and the strength I had shown in forging my own path. It was an olive branch, a chance for reconciliation. I read the letter twice, emotions swirling within me. Part of me wanted to reach out to mend the fractured relationship. But another part of me hesitated, wary of reopening old wounds. Edith looked over, her eyes soft with understanding. "What will you do?" she asked gently. I folded the letter, slipping it back into the envelope. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I want to forgive, but I'm afraid of getting hurt again." "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," Edith said, her voice wise and steady. "It's about finding peace within yourself, regardless of what others do." Her words resonated with me, a reminder that I had the power to choose my own path, to define my own happiness. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat with Jonah, sharing the letter and my thoughts. "What if things never change?" I asked, my voice tinged with uncertainty. Jonah wrapped an arm around me, his touch reassuring. "Then you'll know you tried," he said simply. And that's enough. In that moment, I realized that my journey wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about finding my own strength, my own voice. I had learned to stand on my own, to build a life that was truly mine. The next morning, I penned a response to Marjorie. I thanked her for her letter, for acknowledging the past, and expressed my hope for a better future. It was a step toward healing, a chance to move forward without the weight of resentment. As I sealed the envelope, I felt a sense of closure. I had faced my demons, confronted my past, and emerged stronger for it. My journey was far from over, but I was ready to embrace whatever came next. The resolution wasn't perfect, but it was real. And as I watched Leo play, his joy infectious, I knew I had found the family I always wanted, the peace I had long sought. In the end, that was all that mattered.